Earlier this week, the Surveyors Guild asked me to travel to a newly discovered realm to meet the denizens and get a feel for the newfound region. The realm they specified seemed pretty standard. On the paperwork they gave me, they prefaced that the region was filled with the sound of ticking clocks. I felt that this was the perfect moment to take some time to myself. So off I went, into a new land with my large sunglasses, straw hat, and coconut-adorned staff. But at the transit stations of the different destinations around the universe stood a liaison with the guild. They told me a few details about the realm I was headed to. I noticed at the time he kept checking his pocket watch neurotically. Probably should have taken that detail to heart. Anyway, at the portal to the new region, the usual contractors were here to help stabilize the new portal were working diligently. My liaison explained to me that the region can be quite oppressive and handed me a pair of earplugs, had me sign off some papers, and then he left. I was quite excited to discover the new adventure, so I jumped right into the portal without a second thought. Initially, the land of clocks and time seemed unlike that description at all. The portal exited in a very idyllic environment of rolling green hills and a gentle breeze. I wondered if I went through the correct portal. I tossed my vacation gear back to the portal and immediately began to scan the environment. You never know at these new locations, they could be hiding many dangers. Once I knew that the environment was indeed just a beautiful landscape, I began to walk. In any direction really, but until I saw anything other than hills. Almost immediately after I crested the first hill, I saw a cobblestone path, people dressed in fitwear running back and forth along it. I stood for a time and watched the runners come and go along the path. I wondered which way to go looking around for any signs. After a while, I just decided to ask one of the runners. As I approached, I could hear the pattering of footsteps along the cobble, but more so, I could hear the quiet sounds of ticking. I tried to stop one of the runners to ask for directions, but they just ran past me. A few of them glanced my way, but continued on running. I decided to follow them in their aerobic journey to seemingly nowhere. As the path twisted, winded round, and over the hills, the ticking sound had become slightly louder, making it seem as if I were approaching a central point. I too began picking up my pace, though running in wizard garb was quite difficult. The ticking sound became loud enough to be noticeable, almost distracting enough to pull my thoughts away. The path finally crested over a hill where on the other side stood a massive Swiss-style house, with runners pacing in and out of a garage-sized front door. The ticking was almost at speech level now. I'm more out of shape than I thought I was. I started breathing heavier, but was dragged on by some force toward the large structure. Not completely exhausted, I stumbled into the structure, finally regaining control of my legs. The structure was deceiving. On the inside was a large, empty, well-lit space filled with standing cycles. Most of them filled with runners hopping on and off in succession. The screens of the cycles were filled with a video of a clock ticking. The footwork, cycling, and ticking filled the air with a crescendo of noise. I was still a little out of breath from the running, so I took that time to try and examine my surroundings. Not really to any avail, as the noises drowned out most of my thoughts now. The cycles themselves were fairly simple. A large resistance wheel attached to a seat and a monitor. Getting a closer look, the clock itself was a simple white face with black minute and hour hands. All the monitors had been synced. Hands seemed to move faster than what would have happened on a usual clock. My deeper examination of the clocks seemed to make the ticking noise even louder now, and I couldn't even hear the runners moving to and fro. The clock on the cycle I was examining seemed to shift and squish in different directions. I fumbled for my earplugs my liaison had given me. They fumbled out of my hands under the path of the runners. I scrambled breathlessly toward the plugs, and a short, stocky man tripped over my crawl. He stumbled face first on the ground, quickly getting up, turned angrily in my direction. His face was a sour red, and even directly in front of me, he still jogged in place. I hadn't noticed it before, but it seemed that he was running just off pace of the clock ticking. In fact, the cyclist seemed to also pedal just a beat slower than the ticking. Anyway, the red-faced man was only a nose-length distance in front of my face now. As soon as he opened his mouth to shout some epithet, I'm sure, his head exploded. Well, not really his head, but rather, in a very short amount of time, the side of his neck began to swell, and a handful of sprockets and gears ejected outward. He collapsed, and as I tapped my staff to his chest, it felt as if his body was made of metals and springs. Quickly stuffing the plugs into my ears, I stared at the corpse and those that ran by with fascination. The earplugs did nothing, but I left them in anyway. A Comforting feeling, really. The sound only grew louder. I wasn't entirely sure if everyone in this realm was on the cusp of a meltdown, so I decided to take my pain elsewhere. I walked just outside and around the building where nobody could see me. And then I screamed out in agony. The sound of the ticking had become an immense tsunami of noise, an unbearable flurry of ticking and talking. I writhed to the ground, clutching the sides of my skull. I attempted to scour my spellbook for a silence spell, almost ripping the pages at the seams. I cast every kind of silence spell I saw: magic negation, disarm, even stuffing dirt into my ears. The pain was unbearable. I threw my book into the dirt and clutched my skull once more. The screams were drowned out by ticking now. My ears began to bleed through the earplugs. My fingers began to claw into the sides of my skull, tearing at the flesh. The pain wasn't only cerebral either. My abdomen felt as if it were being ripped in half from the inside out. My arms and leg muscles writhed in motion, circling and nodding underneath my frail skin. Soon enough, even my mouth felt the change, my tongue twisting into mechanicum. Gearing and sprockets filled my vision through my clutched eyes. The green world I had found here seemed lost in a dream now. Ticking was the only thing occupying my brain, a rhythmic excursion into a world unknown to me. I laid there for a while, sodden and shaking, and when I stood, I had been reborn anew. A mechanical being I was, filled with the gearing and engineering of a fine mastercraft timepiece. The earplugs were of no use to me anymore, another trifling away from the rhythm of life. And as all mechanical beings from this world do, so shall I. I simply ran along. Catching my body at first was quite difficult. Fine mesh gearings were overtuned, and I launched along the path awkwardly. The path at first was difficult, embarrassing, but through all the awkward passing by other runners and the occasional trip-up, I was off. Accurately in step with the windings and gearings of my body, things went smoothly for a time. But soon, the life I had before I entered this time cube came flooding back into my mechanical mind. I slowed my pace, just offset to the ticking of the world. I thought on the magics I'd left behind, and the realm and spirits beyond this one. Cresting the hill I originally entered this realm from, I deviated from the path. The portal I had entered from was still there, flourishing and buzzing with the sounds of magic. Jogging in place, just out of step, I remembered the magics of which I cast upon this world. Reaching my hand out into the air, I tried casting a simple mage light spell. No effect. Another spell, this time a simple gust of air. No effect. The gears in my body began clicking faster. I could feel my body begin to heat up. Emotionally, I felt fine. What need would I have for magics? But my body wouldn't budge. My legs moved faster. My spring-wound heart creaked in stride. And with my arm outstretched toward the sky and my face feeling flushed, I stopped. And the gears and sprockets of my construction poured out from my agape mouth.